Hi everyone. One of the signature features on the Cuore Avanzato are the alloy wheels, a 13-inch 8-spoke design with a diamond cut face and dark grey insets. Now, alloy wheels on a car that's pushing 20 years old and lived outside are very likely to be a bit corroded, especially with us salting the roads here in the UK during the winter. So, unsurprisingly, my wheels weren't at their best, with yellowing clear coat over corroded front faces, flaking paint, and some seriously grubby barrels when you look at them from the rear. So let's crack on with getting these cleaned up a bit. I'm starting at the back because that's going to be the dirtiest job and I want to get it out of the way first. You can see I'm getting in there with a wire wheel on a drill because there's a heavy layer of crud to get off, and as you can't see this area when the wheels are on the car, I can afford to be pretty aggressive with it. What you might be able to see here is that I've got an old car mat under the wheel, which is to protect the front face from scraping on the concrete, as the design of the wheel means it's practically flush with the sidewall of the tyre and very easily damaged if you put it face down on a rough surface. Speaking of damaging things, these tyres are going to be going straight in the bin once the wheels are all refurbished, so I have no concerns over accidentally clipping the sidewalls while I'm attacking the rim with the wire wheel. Obviously, if you're doing this yourself and you want to use the tyres afterwards, take a bit more care with what you're doing. After a significant amount of cleaning up, I gave the wheel a blow down to get rid of the resulting dust, and it's come up pretty well in terms of the condition of the surface. Now I needed to work on the other side. Again, a wire brush on a drill let me work the pockets between the spokes, but I also pulled out the Dremel to get at these awkward areas with a miniature wire wheel for some of them and a small drum sanding attachment for the really tight corners. Once I'd cut through the majority of the flaking paint and corrosion in these areas, some sanding paper let me clean up the surface of any resulting marks so it wouldn't be too obvious under the paint when recoated. Then it's time for the bit that really made my fingers and wrist ache afterwards. Wet sanding the front face of the wheel to both remove the dead clear coat and to level out the machining marks where it was originally diamond cut. Now, if you want to have the wheel diamond cut again, you can effectively ignore this entire step and the later fine wet sanding and polishing that I'll be doing. Plenty of wheel refurbishing companies will provide a diamond cutting service. There's actually one a couple of the miles down the road from me, but it can be a little pricey. So I made the choice to go with a polished finish and take the hit on the amount of work required. So here we are with some wet and dry and some mildly soapy water cleaning up the surface. I'll spare you the whole thing and we'll cut to just hosing it down afterwards, which has left us with a nice even bare aluminium surface. Now it's time to paint the areas we won't be polishing. So the surface gets a quick wipe down to make sure it's dry and clean, and I start masking up the areas I don't want paint on, taking my time to get as close as possible to the edges to minimise what I'll have to clean up later. That done on the front, I also masked off the centre bore on the back as I didn't want paint in there where it fits onto the hub spigot. My last job before painting was a wipe down with panel prep wipe to make sure any last bits of dirt and grease are removed. The first paint to go on is an etch primer, which properly adheres to the aluminium surface so the paint will actually stay on the wheel. I did a couple of coats of this on all the areas that won't be polished up. Incidentally, all this masking up and painting only certain areas is probably optional if you'll be diamond cutting the wheel, so check before spending the extra time doing it. The wheel centre cap is plastic, so that gets a coat of plastic specific primer instead, and both are left for the paint to cure. Colour coat comes next. I'm using E-Tech's Technic Grey, which is a sort of anthracite metallic. It's not quite the same as the original Daihatsu colour, but as I'll be doing all the wheels, it's not an issue for me. A couple of coats of this with some light sanding between them, and the centre cap gets hit with the same colour as well. Once the colour is on these and dry, the last stage of painting is some lacquer or clear coat. This is another E-Tech brand aerosol, which they sell as being specific for wheels. A couple of good wet coats really shows a nice finish, and it's left to cure. You'll notice that I didn't clear coat the centre cap, and that's because first I'm covering it with this chrome look vinyl that should match up nicely with the polished aluminium of the wheel. I'm using the vinyl because my experience of chrome paint is that it's really not that brilliant and it just never quite has that right look to it. Some heat from a hairdryer helps the vinyl conform nicely over the slight curvature of the centre cap, smoothly and without wrinkles. You might be wondering why I bothered painting the cap if I was going to cover it in vinyl, and here's the reason. With a good sharp scalpel, I'm cutting out the vinyl over the Daihatsu logo to reveal the base colour underneath. I also trim the vinyl around the outside diameter, and then it's ready to go and be clear coated, which hopefully will seal down the cut edges. Back to the wheel itself, and the masking gets removed to reveal the bare aluminium underneath. There are, inevitably, some areas where the paint is encroaching fractionally onto the bare face, so to both clear that back and to improve the finish on the aluminium, I wet sand it with some 1500 grit all over. I then step up to wet sanding with 2000 grit. I do have 2500 and 3000 on hand as well, but I felt this was as far as I needed to go to give me a surface for polishing up. I'm using Meguiar's all metal polish, which I've thinly smeared on the face of the wheel beforehand to avoid too much sling as I polish up with foam pads on a drill. You can do this polishing by hand, but it's obviously more work like that, and you can also use a dual action polisher if you have one. I do have one, but I felt the drill would work well for me here, and it's slightly less unwieldy on a small intricate shape like this. With the polishing done, I grabbed one of my mankier old microfibers to wipe down the majority of the polish residue left behind and check the finish so far, which was certainly coming up pretty nicely. There were a couple of tighter spots I felt needed a bit more attention, so I gave those a polish up by hand. Then I changed to a good clean microfiber and buffed up the finish. Ideally I want to keep it like this as long as possible, but it seems that clear coat can sometimes not adhere too well to a polished surface, and ultimately, if I need to, I can repolish as necessary to bring the shine back. So with that in mind, I'm using an aluminium specific sealant from Sonus, which I put on with a pad and then wipe down, as per their instructions. I also gave the painted areas a coat with some similar protectant, a Diamond Bright one, which I think I got as a freebie at a car show. Last job is just to press home the centre cap, and I'm glad to say it does seem to match up very nicely with the polished aluminium. As a reminder, here's what the untouched wheels look like, with their horrible, dull and unloved finish, and here's how the painted and polished refurb compares. I am really happy with the transformation, and it's just as good on the back, with the old corroded mess now turned into a smooth, uniform finish. Is it 100% perfect? No, not quite, but it is definitely good enough, especially considering where I started from. I hope you agree with me on that, and that you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe below, and I'll see you again next time.